Hello, hello, and welcome to the Guru Gaming live stream. We're going to be talking about today all of the things that Star Citizen is bringing into the universe for players new and old. So grab your snacks, relax, recline like I am. It's going to be a pretty awesome show. Um, a lot of people have started to talk about these things and started to, create buzz around it. Of course, you got the corpos out there still doing what they do, um, causing chaos. But it's a lot harder for people to do things like that, to talk bad about Star Citizen when they see the direction that the game is going and how monumental this game really is going to become, right? It's not just going to be your normal sandbox space MMO. This is going to be something that's going to span, time and space in a way that hasn't been done for a game, And so, I'm really excited about it. A lot of my visions about the game has been vindicated. A lot of the tech that they're starting on, some of the core systems have been polished up, and they're going to start working on some other systems that's going to introduce a lot of improvements to the game. But yeah, without further ado, let's get right into it. The first thing we're going to review is the talk about one of their new components to the Star Engine, which is the Genesis system. Okay. And what the Genesis system is, it's a system of systems, right? It's a combination of systems that's going to create new worlds and new life into the universe. So, without further ado, let's listen to Benoit or Benoit talk about it a little bit here.
And hello, Manchester. I'm not gonna need this anymore. Cool. I am Benoit Beauséjour, or as some of you know me, I am Balt on Spectrum. Today, we will talk about Brave New Worlds. This is Pyro 2, Monox. It's a barren planet, not really habitable. Now, since the advance of our planet tech, we've always allowed players to circumnavigate planets and move from orbit to ground seamlessly, explore complex areas in intricate detail. Now, with server meshing, we're going to need a lot more locations for missions and destinations for more life. But there's a major question that has always followed this project since the beginning of Alpha 3.0. How are we going to make a large number of planets and systems? How are we going to meet the fidelity benchmark we've established?
That was the
In
question.
this technology update, we bring life to lifelessness, even to Monax. We take the physical representation of the terrain, the geology, the
In this technology update, right? Meaning this is what they're working on. This is the direction of the game. I think he's the CTO if I'm not mistaken, but he's the one in charge of the vision for the technology in Star Citizen, right? Well, for you know the whole company for that matter, but specifically Star Citizen, right? So let's finish listening to what he's saying.
atmosphere, the climate, and the environment to create accurate biomes that spring naturally from the collision of all these environments. Coherent, denser biomes that follow the laws of nature that we encode into data. Data that we then leverage to place flora and fauna, yes, but also settlements, buildings.
And everybody knows games in today's day and age has this procedural capability, right? It has the ability to create certain things procedurally without uh, artists and graphic designers having to and programmers having to actually put the things into the world, right? It creates it procedurally. It proceeds to create this, right? So what they're introducing and what he's describing is something a little bit different, a little more unique, because it's not just um, you know creating it procedurally, right? It's creating it procedurally based on data, based on certain elements, right? Which in this particular case, what they're going to be talking about here pretty soon is planetary conditions, right? The That's why they keep saying based on nature, right? Meaning the atmospheric conditions, the geological conditions of the planet is what is going to dictate how flora, fauna, different, even and it's going to go into this, but even how they place structures on the planet, right? So there's going to be a certain intelligence to it versus hint hint, AI. It's going to be a certain intelligence to it versus it just being randomly placed out there based on a certain landscape, right? I can pull up, Unity or Unreal Engine right now and just start creating stuff procedurally, right? But in order for me to do that in an intelligent way, right, I have to link it to these systems, which Genesis is the system that it's talking about, to to manage all of that, right? To keep all of that information. We're talking about big data. We're talking about a lot of information that's going to be present and always constantly changing, and these systems are going to constantly ebb and flow that data in and out to produce certain things, even up into weather, right? But hold on. I'm getting a little ahead of myself because I'm excited about this, but let's let them talk about it.
Alien and human life in a planetary context. This creates worlds that are scientifically plausible, richer in gameplay opportunities. We want you to find adventure just by going around the planet without a quantum point. We want you to find actions along your path. For this, we are changing how we made the game. We are scaling how we made the game in all areas. This is not just a Planet Tech update. This is a collection of systems that we call Genesis. Now, to help me explain all this nice work and this nice technology, let us kick us off. And I welcome our very own Ali Brown and Will Hine for phase one of Genesis.
Phase one. Pay attention. This is phase one, the laws of nature. So this is, you got to do this part first. You got to collect the data. You got to create the data, and you got to collect the data, right? That's you got to create a system that of transit for the data to go back and forth in between all of the other systems. The basic architecture of this, which the architecture of this is the laws of nature, right? Which is, I mean, if you're a science geek like I am, that's exciting, right? For you to hear him say, "Oh, it'll be scientifically plausible," right? This is showing that it could really be a planet out there that behaves like this, which creates a sort of immersion into the universe that you're not going to find anywhere else. Yeah, games like No Man's Sky and all that kind, they do the procedural thing and they create thousands and thousands of worlds, right? Yeah, I mean that's cool, but is it scientifically plausible? If I go into this world, is does it feel like I could literally, like if I took a spaceship out of this atmosphere and quantum jumped and took a jump point to the nearest star system, would these be the planets that I actually see? That's what we're talking about here, the known laws of nature, not, just randomly creating stuff, which again, I mean, and it's fun, I played it, I mean, it's fun. It is what it is, right? It's good for what it is. It's good for you playing it and getting that type of enjoyment from it. But when it comes to what Star Citizen is going to become, it can't compare to that. Not at all.
Hello, Star Citizen.
Yes, hello, CitizenCon.
Yeah. So let's start with some introductions. This guy over here is Will Hain, aka Water Guy or River Guy.
And this lovely gentleman is Ali Brown, pusher of Pixels Extraordinaire.
And we're here to tell you about phase 1 of Genesis, which we're entitling The Laws of Nature. And this revolves around the fundamental approach we use to build our planet and is the literal foundation for everything else we're going to talk about in this talk today. Now, it centers on data-driven, physically based rules that we aim to realistically emulate nature and its incredible diversity. Before we dive in a bit deeper, let's just recap on some of the things we already have on our planet. So here you can see our lovely atmosphere and our cloud rendering, which can provide some spectacular views. We have our on-the-fly terrain generation, which is no loading screens in our game, which we're very proud of. And then we have our scattering system that can populate these planets with many different diverse biomes. And we've been setting quality benchmarks for each of these biomes as we come across them one by one.
But what we have isn't perfect. This scene on Microtech, it looks great, but it's not getting the same density that you'd expect from a real pine forest. That's one of the things we want to solve. The other, if I take you to the other side of Microtech, you'd be excused if you thought we'd just turned around and looked at a different part of the forest. Why is that? Well, this is because currently our artists create slices of biomes in great number, and then they distribute them across the planet using humidity and temperature properties. Each slice looks great in isolation, as you've seen, as you've explored. But this is not the solution to give us varied and natural biomes across an entire planet. Additionally, just using humidity and temperature limits us to only 2 degrees of variation. And that's not enough for the sorts of planets and worlds that we want to create and for you to explore.
So how are we going to scale up our planet generation? Well, as I said before, we're going to start with physically based rules that drive everything. We want nothing to feel random on these planets. We want no limitations on the number of biomes. We want infinite biomes that are continuously changing across the planets. And we want extreme density, and we want to maintain or exceed all of the quality levels we've set with our existing biomes. And most importantly, we want it to be scalable so that we can really scale up to the level of content that the designers are expecting. And from your perspective, we want you to be able to truly explore and find unique playing opportunities everywhere on our planets. So to start this, we're going to need more data. So if we see here some of our existing data sets on our planets, we have temperature, which we define locally and globally, and humidity, and that's it for now. With Genesis, we add many other data sets, such as the geology type, the soil type, and then we also go for things like the soil depth and the quality and the nutrients, and many other properties all drive this complex data set that we use to build rule sets on that each individual asset can describe how it should work with them.
We're going to put something together and show you some demos today using some of the assets that you've already know and love in the PU. Although you might see some new stuff later, we'll save that. What you're going to see is a vertical slice of development. It's very early stages, very work in progress, you might see some bugs, but that means it's only going to get better, so be excited. The number one challenge with planets in our game is scale. In no other context do you need a planet to look great from first-person perspective when you're stood among the trees. You need it to look great when you're in a spaceship at a quantum marker miles away, and everywhere in between. There are no loading screens, you see everything. We cannot afford for it to look bad in any of those scenarios. So, let's start from a ground perspective. Demo number 1, let's have a look. So, how do we make that? Thank you, thank you. So, let's talk about first what's underneath it all. The ground! So,
He said that.
in
He
our
said
previous
that
terrain
pretty hard
shader,
there.
we just switched between different ground textures depending on climate and didn't really consider the unique properties of each type. Now, the terrain shader is based around 4 layers. We always first consider bedrock at the bottom of it all. Then, where appropriate, we add layers of soil of different types. We then add debris where appropriate, whether it be pine needles, dead leaves, etc. And then when it gets cold, we add snow. Each of these layers has unique shading properties and unique transitions between them. Because we do this all in one shader, we're able to achieve that as well as being performant. We can also use things like water saturation to darken and tint the soil and other properties to make it look more realistic. But that's not what filled most of the screen in that demo. That's the vegetation. Like what Ali said, we want to emulate the laws of nature. So in Genesis, we have rule sets for every asset that tells it how to respond to our rich data, whether it be soil type, water availability, temperature, geology, or whatever. We assess the viability and the vitality of each asset and compare them to decide what is likely to spawn in a natural environment. This automatically creates the cohesive environments that you saw in that clip. Not handcrafted anymore. No one has told those ferns and those pines to be like that. They each want to be like that. And that's what we're doing, multiple assets coming together to create a unique microbiome. What about trees then? Same thing. They have a larger requirement for space, they have a larger requirement for nutrients. That's how you see the distribution, and it's how it all works. Let's meet the flora that came together to make that forest, and have a look at some of their properties. Now, just to note, they are all going to look quite similar because we've already seen them in the same place, so they must be similar. So, building blocks, like grass and common grass, medium amounts of sunlight. We had ferns, see as a much lower requirement for shade.
You can see right here how the fern requires this much sunlight, this much humidity, this temperature. These are the conditions for this particular plant to render, right? To spawn in this biome. And because of the unique footprint that they're going to be creating, everything is going to have a unique biome. It's going to have its own signature. So when those things meet, right? When those conditions meet, then you'll see that. And you'll also see, and this is what happens in nature just in general, as you change certain zones of climate, you know, the environment changes, right? So, you know, as you move further into the mountains, you know, you get plants that are more suitable to a mountainous terrain. When you move into the desert, you find plants and animals that are more suited to, you know, that type of terrain, and so on and so forth. So same with the snow, which is what they're talking about now, like a tundra type area, you know. So when you do it in that way, it can procedurally generate these things based on certain criteria and not just be random, right? Because yeah, it's cool that it can be, you know, generated randomly, right? That's cool, but that's not what this game is looking to do.
Sunlight. We had salix bushes forming our undergrowth, and we had pines, of course, and multiple variations of pines. Diversity is driven by competition. Everything has ideal conditions, which affects its competitiveness. We also have additional control over this in the form of dominance.
Which will change, which is going to naturally create the seasons, right? So it'll naturally create the seasons because of this diversity and the competition, right? So as the environment starts to dry up, the plants that required more water will start to move away or start to go away, right? And the plants that don't require that will start to grow, right? So as that happens, you get seasons, you get biome changes and all that kind of stuff, right? Which of course is going to be, some things are going to be set because it's going to be determined by a larger principle, like where it is on the planet, right? Things that are, uh, just naturally, just like on Earth right now, right? Things that are at a higher elevation are going to be colder, right? Things that are lower elevation are going to be warmer, right? Things that are, at different lines of latitude and longitude on the planet are going to be different, right? Depending on how the sun hits, and in this particular case, Stanton is the star in the middle of this system. So depending on how the light from Stanton hits the planet, right? So all of those systems are going to be working all together, which is freaking crazy to think about, but it's totally doable. In today's day and age of computing, it's totally doable. We work with, I mean, right now they model climate right now. They have climate models, right? That we use to predict weather patterns, right? It's nothing different. The only difference is they'll be able to actually make it a little bit more stable and a little bit more, it won't have that element of which they can build and they can allow some level of that too, but it won't be so unpredictable, right? They can create a level of predictability into the system where things can at least stay a little bit predictable.
which allows us to make one asset more competitive and more dominant than another, which is just what we see in nature. Everything is constantly fighting for resources and, of course, light. Because we spawn these assets in a hierarchy, it's easy to propagate shade data down
light
over the
light is going to be one of the biggest factors, right? So the whatever type of star is in that particular system, because you got to keep in mind we're not just we're talking about Stanton, but this is going to be applied to multiple. This is how they're going to be able to create multiple systems in an intelligent way without it just being like random, just completely random. And so, depending on the type of star, will determine like what type of plants, animals live there. If it has light, right? So like think about cave. Think animals living in a cave, plants that live in a cave, right? They're gonna be plants that don't require a lot of sunlight, right? Or none at all, right? They're going to be bioluminescent, right? Which we have those there now, but it's going to be intelligent, right? So these things are going to happen because it's a part of this system and it's not just, just placed there. And so they can do it on a much larger scale as well.
distribution of the assets so that we can control ones that prefer or reject shade. Often, like these ferns, they can spawn in light, but they are outcompeted in those scenarios most of the time. So you will see a rogue fern, or a place where there's no seeds for a specific asset, you might start to get this coming in. Let's take a look from a larger perspective again.
And you see how as the elevation goes up, it becomes rocky, right? It becomes more rocky. So therefore, there's less plants, right? Up until like the rock is actually like protruding out of it, right? That's because of that soil data that they were talking about. If there's more rock in the soil, then it's going to actually make it where it's less likely for something to actually spawn there, right? Because it's not going to be able to have roots. It's not going to be able to be to take root, because it's going to be nothing but, it's going to be no soil. It's just going to be rock. So that's literally the way that it works. So, you know, that's what's exciting about this. Rocks the plenty.
So to take you through some of the things we saw in that clip, let's talk about rocks first. So anyone that's done a lot of ground driving and ground vehicles might have seen that our rocks sometimes feel a little bit randomly scattered and can be quite an obstacle sometimes. So in this clip, you saw that the rocks are no longer randomly scattered, and they're now placed based on physically based rule sets. And this logical grouping is achieved via erosion simulations, which we run offline to build localized data maps. And they describe the size of the aggregate and
Erosion simulations that they run offline, meaning this data is fed into the system, so it's not running at the same time, so it's not going to have performance overhead. That's what that translates into, my good people, my Groovians. You're in the right place. If you're looking for a breakdown of what the technology means, I can break it down for you. But that's what that means. That means that it's not going to create performance bottlenecks, right? Because the data is going to be trained outside of this and then fed into the system. And so it's just going to, the only thing the system will have to do is place the things down there. Well, in other words, whatever the system inside the game, that's all it's going to have to do. All the other stuff is going to happen outside of that. So therefore it's going to be a lot smoother. And as they said, a lot less overhead, right? Um, is one of the things he talked about too. Hold on 1 second, I'm going to mute this. So let's go.
And the density and where they should naturally form. And that means we get things like these natural clusters of boulders at the forest edge underneath the cliffside. And on that note, you might have noticed that the cliffs have been dramatically improved in how they shade. We also get to see things like the natural clumping of vegetation caused by seed dispersal. This is controlled per species, so we can get better emulation of their unique growth patterns and create a much more realistic environment. And we also calculate the slope aspect, which is the exposure to vegetation to solar radiation and other environmental factors. And this allows us different species to flourish in different conditions, as we can see on different sides of this valley. And over larger scale, we calculate the age and vitality of each tree individually to drive exactly how high they should be, but also the color of their leaves. Now, this isn't the only thing that will drive the color of the leaves. We're going to introduce the concept of seasons to the game. And this will mean our planets will evolve through the year, and we'll be able to shed leaves from trees and have the grass wither in winter.
So as you're starting to see, all these rules, all this data, it's all coming together to create what we call truly emergent biomes. Let's have one more look at how this varies over a much larger scale. Just like in real life, oh, thank you. Just like in real life, our areas should vary, even by traveling a few kilometers. If you get in a helicopter and fly over the Alps, it all looks a bit snowy, but when you look closer, it's constantly changing. And we're now able to accurately represent that with our changing data. Another very important factor to mention is the distant look. In this screenshot, you don't see a single tree, and yet the terrain is still green. We previously did that with artist-made lookup tables that told the planet what color to be at what position. But that wasn't going to work with all our new data and our far more complex spawning. Now we have a systemic solution. The planet shader is able to intelligently evaluate what's going to spawn there using the same rule sets that cause the assets to spawn there when you get there. That means we can sample the sort of color that is going to project onto the orbital view and use it. We get a far better accuracy from the result.
Watch this.
Together, by creating rules and authoring data that works, we create a continuously varying planet that sets the scene for the incredible exploration gameplay I know you guys are going to have.
Exactly.
But we've done this without compromising on performance.
So yeah, with all this new data sets and these physically based spawning rules, you're probably wondering, how is this going to handle in your CPU? We don't want to melt anyone's CPU, so we've redesigned all of this tech to work much more efficiently than before, and now it can run on many cores. This allows it to be run perfectly well on both the CPU and the GPU. So we've redesigned.
So there was a big thing, you know, people were saying, oh, they need to make this multi-core, multi-threaded game. They need to optimize that and so on and so forth. So here it is, everybody. You've got what you asked for and more. It's actually a lot better. It's not just going to be multi-threaded. It's actually going to be a lot more optimized for current hardware frameworks.
And our framework so that we can run it at both and swap between them freely. Now the benefit
That's
of this
cool.
is we can do things like first.
Now that last part, what he was saying, swap between them freely, that's the part that a lot of games don't get. They don't get. That's why you have so much, you know, graphical issues, because it doesn't swap between the CPU and GPU in a very good way. You know, it's not optimized in that way. You know, but that tech has been out for a long time. You know, that tech has been out for a long time where, you know, you could, you know, the system itself can utilize both things and swap out, you know, I mean, so why games haven't really put a lot of emphasis on that, who knows? But, you know, the key, well, I kind of got an idea why, but the key to that is, you know, that this is going to be a system that is based on that type of architecture. So I'm really excited about that. And as you can see right here, GPU virtual terrain system, right? You can just look at the grid that's right here on how the terrain, right? How it blends, how it caches the results, right? Like on the opposite side of that, it doesn't need to render that, right? Until you start getting closer to it. So it will intelligently be able to do that.
Move the terrain system to the GPU, and we've now done that to get some incredible performance improvements, but we then also cache the results in something we call a virtual terrain texture. I'll give you a quick demo of this now. This is now vastly faster than the previous system, but it also allows us to generate the terrain in much higher resolution, which means all the popping you can see on the mountains as we're approaching, all of that should be completely eliminated on the right-hand side of the screen.
Yep. Because you see it when you're in the game, you see it just start popping in and stuff like that. Oh, but yeah, on that right side,
we've gained
it's good.
By making our terrain system more efficient. We've been able to introduce some improvements, including high resolution ground textures, proper blending between surface types, and of course better tiling. If you're familiar with any of our planets, we've taken off all the assets so you can see the issue.
That's a lot of games that are like that.
Don't see those lines going at all.
Next time you go into your favorite game, look for that. Look, you see those lines? How it looks like it's a like they were laid out. It won't be like that anymore. Yep.
With the terrain data cached on the GPU, like Ali said, we can perform the scattering there too, which is significantly faster. All those algorithms that we've used to generate those first bits can run there without being more expensive on your CPU. And it also means the results are directly there on the GPU. We can render straight from them. That allows us to have dramatically more density in our new system. We can render objects directly without having to go via the CPU every frame. We also cull at different levels of granularity, with bigger groups in the distance and individual assets up close. Just as a demonstration, this is the sort of density you can expect on Microtech today. And in a second, we'll flip over to what you can expect
It's accurate.
from the new upcoming tech.
Now watch the difference. Look at that. Day and night.
In a second, we're going to turn on the culling group, Steve-O, so you can see. These are the groups that we create of those trees and of the terrain. And as we get closer, we shrink them so we're more intelligently.
But what you got to understand about this, right? So I want to put this in perspective for y'all as we're talking about this. The way that it was before, what you saw before, right? You were able to land in those blank spots, right? You were able to land, so you could land in a lot of different places. In this, you won't be able to do that. See? So in a forest like this, you won't be able to land. You'll have to land outside, which will bring in and make useful your ground vehicles, right? So now that you have a ground vehicle, right, you can go out, and which they're going to show too, which is, it looks amazing, but you know, when you're on the ground level, of course we're looking at it from the sky right now, but when you're on the ground level, it looks amazing. Like when you're in the forest and seeing the trees, as they say, you see the forest for the trees. And, you know, I mean, that's amazing, right? So you just got to think about that. Like, okay, so I won't be able to, you know, land in a specific objective. I'll have to land somewhere else and then drive to that objective, which introduces another element of strategic thinking that you have to do in order to, you know, play the game effectively.
Rendering what we need without having to assess each tree individually, all the way down to the ground.
But, and I'm just going to tie this in now before we get to it and start talking about it. But when you think about this as well, added onto this, the outpost building, right? You're going to be able to go to somewhere, set up an outpost, right? So you'll be able to set up an outpost strategically like that, which is surrounded by things like that, which makes it harder for people to just fly in and come in and do things, right? They're going to have to like come from a distance, right? So you're gonna have to set up like perimeter. But anyway, I'm not gonna get too far into that because, you know, I am a strategic thinker like that. So I already have plans on how I'm gonna implement a lot of this stuff. So, you know, and again, shout out to everybody who's supporting. But join the org, you know, join the game. You know, I got my referral code in there, excuse me. So you can join the game and get you a little extra, but join the org too. We want to grow and add new people to the game and help teach you how to play the game efficiently and together. Okay. But this is the summary of phase 1. Now this is just phase 1, right? But phase 1 is going to enable a lot of the other things to happen. So even though they'll probably be in development at the same time, phase 1 is going to be implemented first. So what you're going to see this tech hit the game before you see anything else. Okay. So just keep that in mind, because this is where the data is going to live for all these other systems to really kind of be able to do what they're going to be doing, which we're going to go over that here in a second too. So if you want to watch that with me, or if you want to go check it out, you can go check it out.
To recap some of the things you've seen here in phase 1, we had data-driven rules based on physically based data, generating emergent biomes that continuously vary across our planets to get infinite possibilities. And we've achieved this with much greater density than before and much faster rendering. And we also achieved seamless transitions from ground to space with zero popping. So now that we've got all this tech, it's time to talk about how art might make use of this. So for that, I'll hand you to the next phase towards Sebastian Schroeder.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. No physical.
Thank you. Wow. Thank God there's only 20 of you, otherwise I'd be nervous. Right. Thanks for having me. I'm here on behalf of the Planet Content team, and we're very excited to finally show you some of the things we've been working on. As you've just seen from Will and Ali, the system.
I'm gonna skip ahead.
Let's look at very high moisture and medium to high temperature.
So we're talking about biomes now. And now you got swamps. Which if you played the game already, you know this is amazing. Just to see this in concept right now is amazing. Look at that. That's crazy. The detail on the moss was just crazy. It looked that looked real. It looks like a photorealistic representation. You know. I wonder who's going to be the first one to be Swamp Thing. That's the makings of a horror movie. Your ship goes down in the middle of the swamp. Now what happens? The apex crocodile comes out. No, it's crazy, man. I mean, look at that. Just look at that scene, bro. That is crazy. It looks so good. Like, and to think that all this is driven by the Genesis system, right? By the moisture, right? When an environment becomes very humid, very has a lot of water retention, right? When the soil composition makes it where it retains a lot of water, then what are you gonna get? You're gonna get a swamp in that area, right? So if we blow up that picture, take it out to a planetary view, you just know like some of those areas are gonna have swamps. So when you get those missions that say, "Oh, you got to go to a swamp," yeah, just think about that for a second.
Thanks. That did look really good. So, for swamps, we obviously made vegetation that feels at home in or near water. But before we dive in, allow me to give you a quick primer on our approach to authoring plants. Most species can survive in a fairly wide range of climate conditions, but will only thrive if the conditions are ideal. To support this concept, we author our vegetation assets to describe the full growth cycle of a species. If the conditions aren't ideal, they may not grow to full maturity or look their best, but the species can still exist. So let's have a closer look. For the
So
water
this is
stage, we
just
made
showing
plants
like
Alternatera and
the
Thrive.
assets
We also made
themselves.
aquatic ones to float on the water surface, like the water lily or the pickerel weed. This willow and the one after, a Chinese tallow tree, while comfortable near water, we can also use to replace some of the more aged assets used to seeing elsewhere in the game. The last one, it's taking a bit longer now, but the last one, I'm gonna wait. The last one, you may not see used much in other biomes, but it's a very iconic one for the swamp, the bald cypress.
So different levels of growth for the different, you know, uh, flora, right? And so that's going to introduce. So what that does is, as so think about how when you're moving into an area that's going to have a different, we'll just call it a different genesis map, right? So when it moves into an area that has a different genesis map, right? Then as it's transitioning, you'll start to see different levels of that particular plant, right? Because it's not going to be able to grow to its full potential because it's not completely in the swamp area, right? And so you may see little variations of it, but it won't be the full thing, right? And then as you move into, and then you'll start to see a blending, and then you'll start to see whatever the next biome that's coming after that will be, right? And that all happened intelligently and, you know, procedurally. You won't, it won't, they won't have to literally go in and place this, which is going to be key for a game of this scale. Like they, because them having to go to every planet, put every biome there, put every location. No. And when we get to that other presentation, you'll see what I mean. Like for them to have to do that, even if they're using pre-built assets, right? That's why games like No Man's Sky, that's why they don't do that. That's why they randomly generate it over those thousands of worlds. They don't go in and put all those things down there. Why? Because it would just take entirely too long. The game would never be finished developing if they had to do that all by hand. It wouldn't happen.
So another feature we need for make a swamp experience a proper one is water injection. Over the last year or two, a lot of work has gone into improving the way our water reacts and renders. So
And I don't know if you guys can see that, but you see right here, that's fish. There are actually fish in this water right now, living in this biome. There's fish right here. That's a fish. This is a fish, right? You got fish in this water, man. We're gonna be able to fish. You're gonna be able to get you a boat, sit on the water because it's water interaction, right? So he's about to talk about it, but you're gonna see something else. But you'll be able to float on the water and fish.
So naturally, we wanted to make a biome that highlights those advances. Let's have a brief look at what it's like being inside the swamp. As you walk or swim through the water, you may come across obstacles like logs or debris floating on the surface. They will react to the player character and can be pushed out of the way. We were also pleasantly surprised.
So not just logs will be floating on the water. That's what that means. They're gonna have boats floating on the water too. You can get you a nice old school pontoon boat, or what's the ones with the big fans? I forgot what they're called. The big fans on the back of them. You know, to go down, go through the swamp, right? Because you're not gonna be able to traverse this. I mean, in this, you know, it's about to show, but
When we first saw how the water simulation systemically affects assets floating on the water surface.
you see a ship about to land, right? So you'll be able to like land in certain spots, but being able to go throughout the swamp, you're gonna need a boat. That'll be the smartest way to travel, right? Mark my word, you heard it here first. Watch.
Now, before I get to our second use case of the day, a quick disclaimer. Obviously, all the things you're seeing here today we're still actively working on, but this one in particular, it's a bit early in the process. So let's have a look at extreme object density next.
So he
The
said
data set
this one in
with high
particular
rainfall and sunlight
is
background is the perfect
very
condition for
early
understanding
in the
speed.
process, right? But the rest of them are being actively worked on. Actively, that's the key word. Jungles. Look at the different trees in there. And it's so funny, like you can hear, if you listen to that audio that they're playing in the background to this, that's the same audio that you hear when you go to New Babbage and on Microtech, and you go through the area where it's like tranquility and peace, and it's like supposed to be this very zen place. This is the audio that you hear there. So that's just a little, you know, uh, random knowledge for you, right? So cool. You just wondering that how did that ship get there? Right. That was my first thought.
Considering everything you've just seen is still very much work in progress, the gameplay capture team really did a great job showing our work in the best possible light. With jungles, we wanted to explore the concept of vertical stratification, as they are the prime example for that. What it means is that you have horizontal layers of microbiomes this, uh, defined by the species that thrives with the amount of sunlight and rain that still reaches there. The floor, herb and brush layer, we could almost do before, obviously missing the density. But now we also have the option to add variation to the tree layer by dynamically spawning epiphytes like lianas, orchids, or bromeliads, attached to trunks and canopies of other assets. With this and improved density is what will finally allow us to make convincing jungles. And the best part is, we don't even need a lot of different species to create what we refer to as a canvas of a biome. The idea being that we can vary what kind of forest you're in by adding or replacing the plants that visually stand out the most. Now, to get us started on our certification, we made epiphytes like the Epiprenum and the bromeliad, including a potted version for your hab. Then obviously you need lianas for a jungle. And we also made the grias, which add character to the herb and tree layer. For
So,
tall trees,
new
we decided on a
assets,
fairly generic
right?
rubber tree, as its different growth
You won't
stages
just see the
serve as
same
a
things
foundation
over and
for
over.
our ideas. And that's pretty much it, what we need to make a pretty good base for jungle.
Right. Exactly.
Now, for our third and last use case, let's pretend the data indicates regular rainfall and moderate temperatures. This climate would support a lot of different forests, but we also wanted to use this opportunity to explore extreme scale. And they're just really cool.
So as the light comes up, the redwoods, one of my personal favorites. Look at that. Redwood forest. Look at that. What? Man, look at that. Talk about racing, right? Be on your speeder. Oh no, that's Star Wars, my bad. You be on your, you know, I forgot what the name of them are. But I got one though. And I can't wait to use it for that specifically.
Now, for this one, we first looked at the different redwood biomes on Earth and tried to analyze what the most defining species of them are. With this understanding, we then decided on the following plants to allow for a fairly universal redwood forest that will easily support variation across continents and planets. A fairly common family of species for the ground levels of all redwoods are ferns, in our case the sword fern. We also made a huckleberry variant to provide some visual density for the shrub layer.
A huckleberry
To add some Jurassic vibes,
variant.
we made tree ferns, as they can be found in New Zealand's redwood forests. The most important one, though, obviously sequoias, and they ended up being one of our most complex sets yet. As it turns out, they can grow to be fairly ridiculous in size.
All right.
It keeps going.
Fairly ridiculous in size.
Now, one thing our game's foliage is sorely missing is the ability to properly react to what's happening around it. The goal here is to unify all forces from all sorry for the horrible rhyme, all forces from all sources, wind, characters and creatures, ships, explosions, and whatever else, and have the vegetation behave accordingly. Now, as part of our tech improvements, we will be implementing a GPU-based simulation that's fit for our game scale. For now, we've set up the ferns with our existing CPU-based one to better visualize what it will feel like to walk amongst those giants. Also, with the biomes on our planets now being defined by where an individual object wants to appear, you can expect a lot more happy accidents by having species invade different biomes, making for some unique locations, hopefully. Surely.
See? So that confirms. A lot of the stuff is
Now,
CPU
before I
based,
get to
right?
this PF stage, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody involved, especially my team in Frankfurt for doing such amazing work and being all around great people. And also to all of you guys. I really hope you have a fantastic CitizenCon. This concludes this phase of Genesis, so please welcome Ian to the stage so he can tell you all about the next one.
Now we move into phase 3.
Thank you. Hello, Citizen Khan. All right. Those new planets and biomes were pretty, right? But it's time from Phase 3 Civilization to give you some stuff to do. So, let's talk about location density. We've emulated nature as well as we can to make sure our planets are physically based and realistic, and our biomes are emergent. But it's time to start populating the verse, because where there's people, there are their lives and the structures they build. So it makes sense that whenever you go and explore these planets, that you find their lives. And what's even more important is that when we make these structures, that they use and they follow the same rules as our biomes, such as the jungles and the swamps. But before we continue, let's first take stock as to where we are now. At the moment in the verse, we have these custom, beautifully made locations, such as Ghost Hollow, we've got our distribution centers, or even just some outposts. And these have all been handcrafted by our designers and artists to hit that benchmark. And they've been working directly on the planet. However, going forward,
So this is about to show us how that data is going to translate into creating actual locations. So pay attention to this part.
this doesn't really scale with how we want to go forward with the game. Server meshing is about to arrive, and we're going to have a way higher player count. So those 73 bunkers across Stanton just won't cut it. But in general, it's also pretty barren. There's not much for you to explore and find stuff out there. So there's no exploration gameplay. You haven't really put your character to use for the way that you should. So this means we need to go bigger, which means we need to change our workflow. And with any workflow means we need to first establish a new benchmark. So, with our new benchmark, we are ensuring quality and improve on our previous work and make it even better. And any location that you'll find needs to have its own unique personality and no repetition. We don't want you to find the same location twice. This also means that this is your exploration.
and your findings. So when you go out there and explore with your Carrack or with your Corsair, is that whatever you find, you can share with your orgs or with your friends. As for that density, if you fly down to the planet, we want you to find something, let's say, every 100 clicks. But also improve the mission experience. So when you stay more on the planet, you're more immersed and you go from location to location. Just keep going. So going forward, we are modularizing all our existing locations and assets. And we're basically making a library of buildings and layouts that we'll be using to no longer work directly on the planet. The neat thing, all these modules and assets can be iterated upon and tested right in the editor for all the designers and artists to ensure fun gameplay and interactive sandbox activity, and also make sure all the mission stuff is there. Basically, we're building a toolkit. So let's look at some of the things that we need to keep in mind as we are making that toolkit. First and foremost, we've got our art style and branding. We've got things like Frontier for our settlements. We've got high-tech for the emergency shelters, but also utilitarian, like our bunkers and distribution centers. The richer the data, the richer these locations will be. Secondly, they all have a function. We've got mining for our mining outposts, farming for the farmsteads, or just places where people live. The function of the place will define the way the place looks as well, in its form. And last but not least, the people as well, the faction and their loadouts. We've got lawful people like the new Citizens for Prosperity in Pyro, unlawful, such as Xenofred, and sometimes not even no one. And the place needs to look a bit, derelict. In different places, you'll find different people. So, now that we've made our toolkit and we've defined all this new stuff, let's start building thousands of locations. Yes, I said thousands. So, to avoid the same issue of working on directly in the planet, I'd like to introduce to you Starchitect. What Starchitect allows us to do is directly on a planetary scale, scatter all these new libraries and modules and assets and no longer work directly on the planet. And it uses the same logical rule set as our emergent biomes. And it also gives us full control over the data that we set on these locations. So expect locations in places where they make sense. Let's kind of look at all this new Genesis data and all these new libraries and chuck it into Starchitect and see what it gives us. As you can see, we're now able to make full-size locations, and they will look completely different based on where you'd find them. The layouts are controlled by the rules, and it will reflect its place in the verse. We've got farms, mining outposts, but even our older locations, such as the bunkers that you find on Stanton. So, let's look at an example and kind of use the tool to really, make a location. We can define the rules, as I've mentioned a couple times by now. So for our mining outpost, it wants to be near a resource. We can specify what this resource needs to be. But we can also give it suggestions where sometimes you'd find it here and sometimes you wouldn't. If the location has refineries, it might want to be near water to refine the resources. Then secondly, we can define what buildings should be there. So obviously we need mining buildings, houses for people to live as well, and even power buildings that we can leverage with the resource network. Starchitect will intelligently figure out where to place these and what needs to be at the location. Next up, farms. Its rules, well, temperature. Not every plant can live in every temperature, but the same with soil type. Only certain plants can be in certain grounds. And then we can query the seed map to determine what plants you would find there. What are the harvestables? As for the targets, again, farm buildings, obviously, power buildings, houses, but even animals, such as our beloved quasi-grazers. And last but not least, derelict ships. We've got these all over the place currently. Rules, well, they'd be close to anti-air because they would be shot down, but even in harsh flight conditions, such as mountains or low visibility, probably most commonly find them. Targets, well, crash ship parts, of course. Sometimes you'd find the full remains of a javelin, and the other time you might just find the nose of a starfarer laying around. So,
I don't know if you guys heard that, but I'm going to point it out. Sometimes you will find the full remains of a javelin. That is crazy.
let's talk about coherency. Sure, we can scatter all these locations everywhere on the planet, and you'll find them in places they make sense, but we can do better. You don't just want to find an outpost completely on its own, right? We want to make sure it really feels like people have built their lives here. So, let's talk about some missing bits. We want to tell tighter stories, such as the people's lives, but also logical exploration. If I find one thing, I expect to find something similar or something else nearby. We also need more data control. What defines one mining outpost being different from the other ones, aside from the harvestables? And also give the narrative developments. Make sure, people build near rivers, on mountains, they build near town halls, they build near distribution centers. So to hit that bit of our benchmark, we make sure that locations are
Here
near
we
each
go.
other and group
Now
them
check this
together.
out.
The effect it gives is a fully developed landscape with vistas and points of interest all over. And we group them together in what we like to call a cluster,
A cluster.
like this one that has 13 locations. Let's talk about clusters. Clustering means generating locations near other locations. So, for example, if you find a distribution center, just like in the verse currently, I would find forward operating bases next to them. But if you go even further out, you'd find mining outposts to funnel those resources to the FOBs. Go out even further, you'd find caves around them, because that's where they might find some of the gems. And then we can even specify the data on a cluster level. All of the factions that live at this whole cluster, any mining outpost, that would be the same people, but also what commodities they sell, to find on what resource you'd find. So let's look at an example of the clusters. We have our mining cluster. Again, we can define what rules we should have. Rules, well, near a resource, just like our mining outpost, but also it needs to be on a lawful planet. We can target on a planetary scale where they would need to be. They need protection. As for the targets, well, caves, mining outposts, but even trade posts. Let's go to the other side of the spectrum. Before I do so, I forgot data. We can, on a cluster level, specify, again, what mineral commodities, but also what harvestable types you'd find are in that region. Now let's look at the other side of the spectrum, an unlawful cluster. What rules? Well, they need to be far away from any other cluster, because they want to be isolated and do their evil deeds on their own. And also on an unlawful planet, such as somewhere in the Pyros system. For the targets, outlaw outposts, crash ships, because they would shoot them down, and also ruins from just places they just completely overrun. The data on this one, you'd find specific loadouts, and they'll be using weapons that you wouldn't find in any other legal system. And these weapons will be sold at the shops in these regions. So, now that we have a cluster, let's go even bigger. Just like our locations, we can put clusters near other clusters, and we group them together, ranging between 10 to 15 locations each. And we group this into what we call a sector. Like this one, that has about 120 locations. However, on a planetary scale,
So sectors, right? Well, first clusters and make up a sector on the planet's surface, and then
we can define how many sectors we should have, with each their own data and persona. And every single one of these locations is now ready for the mission system to hook up and give you gameplay, and for you to find a bunch of places on your own. And just on this side of the planet,
and just on this side of the planet,
can you guess the number? We've got about 3,042 locations.
3K locations, 3,000 on one side
And again,
of one planet.
this means as architects, we're just able to, on a planetary scale, just define how many locations we need, what you'd find there, and to just give that full identity. Thank you for listening. And I won't just see you in the verse, but I'll see you in a denser verse. However, this was only the first phase of civilization. Let me introduce you to the stage, the
First
person who will
phase of
introduce live
civilization.
business locations, Francesco Racucci.
So, hi everybody. Benvenuti a CitizenCon. So, also physically accurate. So the distribution of the elements that we have seen and the location and the POIs are influenced by geology, mission, narrative, and the lore. Those locations cannot be lifeless. We want the planets to basically leverage the space that emerge with life. So from an AI perspective, I will categorize the elements of those worlds into 4 macro groups. Emergent environment, that is everything we have just seen being built out of the physical data set. Users-made locations. So this includes everything that our designers or you players will create in the world. So something that is mankind-made and not predefined in the environment. Interior of those locations. Now, this is very connected to the previous point. The difference is that they represent usually a confined space where there is much more tight interaction. And for NPCs, is a lot about interaction with objects that we are usually used to in our everyday lives. And then the day and night cycle. So in essence, the passage of time. That so far didn't have really a lot of impact on the gameplay. So to allow life to respect this world and conform to the rules that this environment defines, well, we want to improve our tools and workflow, and we want to distance ourselves as much as possible from a designer-driven approach. This is because, first, it's labor-intensive, it can be prone to bugs, but also because the scale of the worlds that we've just seen are very hard to be, designer-driven in the markup. So we want to improve this workflow, and we will see how manual markup is also not usually the best option, because with these worlds that are heavily impacted by users and changes and customization, it's very hard to know in advance where interesting things are. So today I want to show you a couple of examples of what the IT team has been focusing on to make these systems supported and scale correctly to support these vastly dense dynamic worlds. So we'll look at perception in light and dark environments and dynamic cover generation. So attacking an outpost now must have a level of depth that goes beyond what we had. So layouts of the environment can change, vehicles may or may not be present, and PC can be anywhere. And if it's a bright day, well, we will be more visible, but our enemies will also be more visible. And if you choose to attack at nighttime, well, we'll attack in shadows. During darkness, it's going to be a bit harder to be spotted, and it will give us more opportunities to be stealthy and sneaky. How do we do that? So as you see, there is also a lot of different light conditions in this outpost. So in this scenario, we will start look at how perception is impacted by the day and night cycle. On the planetary surface, as we've seen in the outpost, natural and artificial lights are the two elements that will impact vision. And knowing that, you can use this to leverage your gameplay style to exploit basically all the environment. So what is perception? On the NPC level is the combination of data that we collect out of the senses. And vision is one of the senses and just tries to, in a way, simulates the human side ability. So designers can already tweak the perception in different ways. And one way is defining how quickly NPCs can understand what they're seeing. And the light condition have a direct impact, how quickly an NPC will fully understand, for example, if there is an hostile in front of them. And obviously, there is condition of light that designers can control, and some others, like the day-night cycle, that they can't. So in this video, we'll see two main elements: the graph on the top left and the two colorful cones. The graph on the left basically represents the current light level the MPC is in, and the current multiplier this light level generates to speed up or slow down the MPC perception and understanding. The two cones instead represents the primary and secondary FOV. The red color means that if you stand in that location, it will result in MPC reacting the slowest to you, and the green color instead represents the quickest response. So during the night, MPC will have a hard time to understand and foresee and see things. But if they have flashlights on their helmets, they can turn it on, and this will impact their primary FOV, making still the peripheral vision a bit more uncertain. And as you see here, first of all, the MPC is patrolling with his domesticated friendly Copion. This is because he wants to exploit the vision, night vision capabilities of the animal, and it's kind of our tier 0 pets. So we will now look at the cover system. That is the next dynamic things that I want to show you. So when we introduced planetary navigation mesh the first time, our goal was really to create a systems that would support and process the environment in a very dynamic way. Our planets are just way too big to statically export them and process them, first of all. And then their regions only exist when somebody's there and the NPCs are there. So essentially, environment has its purpose only when life exists. Also, let's keep in mind that even if we could export dynamically and statically those planets, so processing dynamically all a static version of the planet, this would be, first of all, wasteful and on the memory side and time-consuming. And also because we have a lot of runtime modification of the terrain, this would require us to still reparse it at runtime, and pretty much that will be almost all the time. So to generate the cover data, we want to leverage the navigation mesh system. And what we do is, as you see here, the blue polygons are basically where NPCs can walk, and the green ones are what we call cover surfaces, that are our simple representation of the environment, what NPC uses to understand if they can hide behind something and if they can shoot from some positions. So up to now, we have an approach where designer would be a designer-driven approach. Designer can define in the locations where cover was interesting. They could mark it up, either the location itself or prefabs, and then with a special entity that would just sample dynamically the environment, but would still be designer-driven. This is obviously a good approach it's also a standard approach in gaming industry, but what about all those organic and inorganic elements that get scattered with a new system? Like if designers want to iterate on these ones, for example, and they want to change the physical data sets, those scattering tools will just change completely the layout. And what we want is that designers can do this change without being afraid of doing it because the gameplay was, predefined and controlled, and now they can just make something beautiful but also fun. Besides that, yes, we did have a prefab approach where you can build stuff out of small building blocks. This is obviously a good approach because it's, in a way you can build stuff out of smaller version, but this creates a lot of unnecessary data. Imagine a crate, and we can say that the crate can generate cover. Now we stack 100 crates, and what happens? That we have a lot of data to generate cover that we have to process, throw away. This would just waste CPU cycles for nothing. This is why, until now, you also couldn't find an NPC in a forest like this one and see them hiding behind a tree or a rock. So enabling the dynamic generation of covers on the planet allows us to exploit all the elements of the environment. Whenever navigation mesh generates, NPC can now have a chance to fight with you hiding behind available elements. Boulders, rock, walls, and are all useful elements right now. However, we don't have to limit ourselves to static geometries, but also vehicles can be used for cover. And as you can see, this is dynamically generating while the vehicle moves. So be careful where you park your Ursa, because now it can become a source of danger for you as well. Last but not least, these systems can be just used on all the different type of navigation mesh we have, so not on the planet, but also, for example, the interiors and everything you guys construct. Because obviously, you guys will build your own locations, but you don't really mark up stuff, or you don't want to decide that, because that's going to come automatically out of the system. So I want to show you So what I want to show you now is just like a little bit of insight of what goes behind the scene when we generate cover and navigation mesh. These are some of the steps that our system does. So we always start from the environment voxelization. What that means is we process the geometry, the physical representation of the geometries, that is a little bit simpler than usually the render mesh, and we construct it in a voxelized approach. This is also using different types of agent definition. Why so? Because obviously where a human can move is not the same as where a vehicle can move. So we can define
content, locations, biomes, populations, planets, and systems. And now they're all beautifully lit too, thanks, Ben. But how do we paint this world with sounds? It's a challenge. It's a challenge of scale. We need to support really look forward to getting this in game for you and getting you enjoying it at home. Now, that's all from phase 4 of the Genesis cycle, Light and Sound. So I'm going to hand you back to the amazing Ben and Ali to bring us home with the final phase.
Thank you, sir.
So, as Graham says, this is going to be the final phase of Genesis, and it's called Nature's Wrath. And this is where we're going to bring the very planet itself to life. So, first off, let's start talking clouds. So clouds have got an atmosphere, have got to be one of my favorite visual features of our game, and they're truly awesome, but they're also completely static. Nothing has changed with them. So what we want to bring with Genesis is the evolution of clouds over time. But this isn't just some simple scrolling animation. We use the same physical data sets that drove the biomes we talked about earlier and Starchitect, and these are also now driving a physical simulation of the clouds so they can form and dissipate in realistic conditions. So this means things like the oceans, the prevailing winds, mountain ranges, and the temperature will all impact the clouds. But to complement these more dynamic clouds, we've also improved our lighting model. So it now correctly accounts for how light scatters multiple times inside a cloud. And this is important, creates much deeper lighting, and it can contrast against the sun's rays, resulting in much more vivid cloudscapes like we see on the left here, something we're all too familiar with in Manchester.
Now, it would be awesome to bring this into context and show it on an actual location. Let's take a look at a quick scene to round this up. It's a nice day on the surface, but something's different. The clouds are moving, but they're not just moving, they're forming naturally in changing shape. They dissipate as they glide on the atmosphere based on wind data, stratus and cumulus alike. Now we start seeing the new cloud shading model come into play. We are seeing enhanced occlusion beneath the cover, emphasizing the sunbeams how it interact with the clouds, and seeing the light shafts peer through the layers. Now, as this is closing in, we can start to see the changes in visibility of the area. Light precipitation is starting. Previously, we authored static cloud shapes, but no longer. We didn't manually place a volume here. Its presence has been informed by Genesis data. Oh, and it's not just a cloud volume. It's a weather front. Now we're trying to see the wind picking up. Terrain and rocks are getting wet. Vegetation, grass, and the overall environment are responding to the weather. The system is changing the world around us. We can see puddles being formed dynamically in the dirt, properly responding to light, reflections, and rain droplets. Making it's getting really ominous and loud in here. I can feel the danger. I think we should let this play out in the game.
Listen to that rain and storm sound. I could just go to sleep to that. Sounds so good. We just watched a storm front come in to an area in the game. The wind and the pressure affecting the flight of the ship. Lightning. Oh, this is awesome. Best bet is going to be to climb above those clouds as fast as possible. That looks amazing.
Wow. Man, that's what we call the Falco maneuver, to get out of there. Ali, please break this down for us. What did we just see?
Yeah, so that was a combination of lots of tech we just saw that all combined together to make a really great cohesive experience. So we started with the cloud simulation, which wasn't really a cloud simulation, it's a weather simulation. The rain will appear not at random, but it's based on physically plausible conditions, so you have real weather fronts evolving across your planet all the time. We have a host of visual effects, like the rain, and then you have the atmospheric scattering that you get under the columns of rain. We had the puddles and the splashes and all of this type of visual effects. We saw the wind developing over time, and that introduced turbulence to the flight model, making flight very challenging. And then, of course, we saw the lightning, which plays havoc with your instrumentation, but direct strikes will damage your ship, and of course, some storms will be dangerous enough to be fatal, as Ben's unlucky Aurora just found out. And these storms will sometimes be short-lived and localized, but others will be larger and potentially permanent on some planets. And this is going to restrict access via flight. I mean, players will be forced to resort to ground vehicles or even foot. And this is all going to be dynamic, meaning that you might find yourself trapped in some really unexpected situations. So we really can't wait to use all these mechanics.
It's going to be dynamic. You're not going to be... Oh, man, this is going to be so cool. Talk about cinematic experiences.
A wise yogi once said, "It's your job as a pilot to compensate and stay on course." All right, what have we learned today, guys? We've
We
shown
learned
an approach
Genesis.
of encoding the rules of nature into planetary data, We've seen biomes emerge from geology, temperature, humidity, climate, weather, the physical terrain. We create denser, more diverse living planets without artists hand placing or manually creating biomes, instead leveraging asset mapping. We've shown you a new way to make the game that can scale, to create thousands of Corian places for civilizations on planets that can be used for missions or immersion gameplay without art and design hand placing locations, leveraging world design rules instead. We've seen how populations of AI and NPCs inhabiting locations dynamically adapt their understanding of the environment without custom markup by developers, allowing the creation of more playable spaces rapidly. We've shown you how light and sound also benefit from Genesis data to influence planetary environments, and we've shown how these systems come together when weather comes into an area, changing your gameplay experience significantly. Our goal with Genesis and all of its systems is to create more worlds, better worlds, faster, by applying our tech wizardry and craftsmanship to build systems that respond to data. That's our Star Engine presentation for today, guys, for this year. Have a great CitizenCon. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you very much.
And that was the Genesis system from Star Citizen. And as always, guys, thanks for checking it out with me. We're going to recap the rest of it here a little bit later, but we're going to take a little break because I know these can be pretty long, but I want to break it up into different videos. So that was Genesis. And the next one we're going to be looking at is going to be the Social Verse.
Deeply.
So watch out for that one coming up soon. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Hope you have a great one. Make sure you join the org if you don't have one already, and use my referral code to sign up and to jump into the verse, okay? Because there's going to be a lot of good stuff coming up here in this next year.